All right, hello everyone, and welcome to the CART Systems Facing Track Call for September. My name is Sean, and I will be your host today, along with Jim Louse. Before we get started with an introduction to our topic and today's speakers, I wanted to quickly highlight some notes. So first, if you haven't already done so, consider attending the HPC SysPros workshop at SC. The workshop will be held in the afternoon on Monday, November 14th. We are also planning a joint social gathering with HPC SysPros that will be held the evening before on Sunday at Pegasus City Brewery in downtown Dallas. So please join us there if you can't make the workshop to catch up with some of your colleagues and friends. So with that, on to the main event. Today we are joined by Andrew Bruno and Dori Sadak from University of Buffalo, who will be presenting on their HPC Toolset tutorial, which some might be familiar with for folks that have attended PERC the last few years. So please give a warm welcome to Andrew and Dori, and please sign into the call doc. And Andrew and Dori, please take it away.
Thanks, John. We had planned to do a Zoom poll, so we're not going to be able to do that today, but I was hoping if you have access to Zoom tools and you have the little reactions button, if you could just go to that and give us a thumbs up or thumbs down if you are familiar with any of these three products, so ColdFront, OnDemand, or XDMoD. I'll just give everybody a second to do that. Okay, so it looks like about half, maybe half attendees are familiar. And then clear that, and then if you could just give us a thumbs up or thumbs down if you're actually running any of these products or testing them out at your center. That would be good to know too. Okay, so like John said, we are presenting just a really brief overview about our tutorial that we put together about 3 years ago for PERC with the OnDemand team from Ohio Supercomputer Center, the XDMoD team from UB, and Andrew and I are with the ColdFront team. And we're also working on an NSF grant with Virginia Tech, so they're always part of these joint projects that we're working on. The tutorial itself was a full day tutorial, and so we're not obviously going to cover that today, but you can go to the GitHub repo, download everything for the tutorial, and through the repo there's 3 different steps, one for each project, and you can go through everything that we went through in that full day tutorial. The only problem with doing that is that there's like no context to all of it. So today we are going to go through just an overview of the products and how they work together, just so you can get an idea, and then you'll be able to go through the tutorial yourself and mess around with all the containers. So I'm going to do a really brief intro on the 3 products in case you're not familiar with them. And by really brief, I mean like 1 slide. So if you've heard our spiel before, hopefully this doesn't bore you. Andrew's going to go over the technology that we use for the tutorial and how to use it, and then take you through an example of what we're just calling an HPC lifecycle. So from allocations all the way through utilization. And then we obviously will include the slides from today in the call doc, so you'll be able to get all of the tutorial links. We've got our contact information, as well as all the contact information from OSC and Virginia. And then we're going to leave plenty of time for question and answer. It would be good if you could either hold your questions until the end or throw them in the chat, and then we'll get to them at the end of the demo. So I wanted to start out by just giving you a little bit of an overview of ColdFront, because most people are not familiar with ColdFront. I assume, because this is a systems facing meeting, that the majority of you are either sysadmins or your center staff, like you're some kind of system staff. So we realized a few years ago that there was this general problem of having a bunch of different resources and a lot of users wanting access to those resources. And we wanted to figure out a way that we could automate this and sort of provide a front door for our users so they know when they come to CCR what it is that we have to offer and what of those things that would cost them money or they could use for free. So as we started talking to other groups, we realized that this is a very similar problem. We just approach it a little bit differently. We have our policies that we're trying to automate. You probably have some sort of policies. For example, we have a general cluster that we allow all UB faculty access to and their students at no cost. But we have other clusters that are private clusters. We have a cloud, an on-premise cloud that we charge for. So yeah, you could have access to it, but you need to pay us. So we have all of these policies and we wanted a better way to automate them rather than just having people email us and say, I want access to CCR. So some of you might be with a really large organization that maybe has 30,000 students or I should say 30,000 users in an Active Directory. You're probably not wanting to provide all of those users access to your HPC center. So we wanted to have a way to take that subset of users and specifically say this group of people can have access to that thing. So we've got our sysadmins who are, of course, superheroes. They're providing that access control. You're doing this right now in some way, shape, or form. So we wanted to hopefully help you automate that. So we decided to use the concept of allocations. Even though some of our stuff is free, it's almost like getting a free subscription to a magazine. You still have to sign up for it. And if you want to keep it, you have to renew it every year. So our allocations have some sort of limits to them, whether it's a date limit, like this allocation lasts you a year, or there's some sort of units associated with it, like 10,000 CPU hours or 3 cloud subscriptions, or maybe there's a payment associated with it, like I want to buy the software license, and how much does this cost, and how long does this license last for? Is it in perpetuity or is it just a 1-year license? So now we have our users come in these groups. So we have the subset of users come in and they ask for allocations for a couple of things that they want access to. Then we have another user come in and request access to something totally different. And maybe somebody else wants access to a whole bunch of different things. The sysadmins are looking at all of these requests that are coming in and deciding should this person or this group have access to these resources? And then if so, how do we actually automate the access? So some things are going to be maybe controlled by a Unix or an Active Directory group. Some things like a Slurm cluster are controlled by Slurm accounts and associations. Maybe there's database accounts or some sort of homegrown scripts that you've got, everybody's got them, that you're using right now to automate this, this access problem. And of course, there's always going to be some kind of proprietary software that we're supporting that we have no control over. So how can we best make this happen? Even if ColdFront only ends up being a facade, you're still doing that manual process on the back end. At least you've got ColdFront to say on the front end to your users, if you want access to this, next year, you've got to renew this access. Otherwise, we're going to remove it. So once they get access to you've activated their allocation and they have access, then they're going to use some kind of tool to log into those resources. So for the tutorial, we've used OnDemand. You're going to, as a sysadmin, you're going to set up the resource, configure it in ColdFront. Then your PI or your faculty member is going to come into ColdFront and request an allocation for it. You'll activate it and run what needs to be run on the back end to sync the account, and then they'll be able to log into OnDemand and run the job. Once their jobs are running, you can use XDMoD to get the usage information at a user level and also as a whole for the center. Of course, depending on what type of resources you have, there might be other ways that your users are getting access to this stuff. So maybe there's some database software or a scientific portal that you need to provide them access to, whatever the case may be. All of that's done, outside of ColdFront, and they'll be able to access those things once they have the active allocation. So like I said, very brief overview. We're using ColdFront to manage the access for users to these resources. At UB, we use it as the source of record. So if it's not in ColdFront, it doesn't exist on the systems. We're trying to encourage our users to use that as the main portal, the front door to CCR. This is where you go when you're a brand new PI at UB and you want to know what resources we have. This is where you go to add new students to your group and remove students who've graduated. And this is where you go to report to us some things that are important to us for like ROI statistics, like publications and grant information. Once you've got access, you're going to use OnDemand as the easiest way for onboarding. There's no need to install an SSH client or set up SSH keys. Of course, you can still do that. I mean, we still provide that as a service. But if you really want the easiest method for logging into your systems where your users don't have to really know much, OnDemand is a web-based portal. You can use any browser. There's nothing else to install. It's great for students who might only be using your systems for like a month, and then they can just log in, use it, and be done. They don't have to do anything extra to like learn the system. Like obviously there's pros and cons to that because you do want your users to know Linux commands and things like that. But for the initial onboarding, Open OnDemand has really been beneficial to centers who are trying to expand the access to their HPC. And then once you've got users running, you would use Open XDMoD. It aggregates all of the job data running on your clusters as well as a cloud environment if you want, or storage, and you get really detailed information about what's going on. So it's useful to you as a sysadmin because you know what are the wait times on your clusters, how many people are running, how many jobs are running, are your clusters filled. You can, let's say you do a storage update and then you start looking at the graphs from XDMoD a week or two later and you're seeing that the IO is like really poor. You might track that back to that storage update that you did, a few weeks ago. It's also really great for your users because they're going to log into OnDemand, and if you've got the two products linked, you'll see XDMoD graphs on your OnDemand dashboard. And they'll show the last 5 or 10 jobs that you ran and the efficiency of those jobs. So if they log in and they see a whole bunch of red, they're going to know that their jobs are inefficient, and hopefully it encourages them to go and actually look at those jobs and see why are they showing up as inefficient. Maybe because you requested 250 gigs of RAM and you're only using 2, I don't know, something like that. And hopefully over time, you'll see that your systems are being used more efficiently because your users are becoming more aware. So I'm going to pass it off to Andrew at this point. He's going to take you through a demo and show you how this tutorial is set up, and then we'll come back and we'll just talk about any questions that you guys have.
Okay, thanks, Dory. Let me just share my screen here. Okay. Okay, so my name's Andrew Bruno. I work with Dory at UB, and I'm going to give a quick demo of the workflow that Dory just talked about previously using our HPC Toolset tutorial. So this is a full-day tutorial that we give at conferences, and it showcases the 3 applications that we wrote, so Open OnDemand, XDMoD, and ColdFront. And the motivation for building this this tutorial was to provide attendees some real-world experience using these 3 applications And also, I mean, not only just using them, but actually installing them from a system administrative perspective. So how do you configure them? How do you actually do some maybe more advanced configuration? And then from a user perspective, so what is the user experience like actually interacting with these tools? So you can find this up on GitHub, and we'll share the link in the chat, and it's also in the slides. And again, it's a full day tutorial, so definitely check it out, and you can actually go through all the steps that we do throughout the whole day in this tutorial here. If you just check it out and basically click on the Get Started, and it'll just walk you through all the steps. I'm not going to go through all the steps today because obviously we don't have time, but definitely check it out and give us some feedback. We're definitely open to feedback. So I thought I'd start off just with a high-level overview of what this actually is. So what we tried to do with this project was create an entire HPC center using Docker containers. So when you download this and run this project, it'll actually start a bunch of containers on your local workstation. And they're all kind of connected through a virtual network. And it kind of emulates exactly what would be running in a real HPC data center. So typically you'll have, some compute nodes. So we have, 2 containers that represent some compute nodes in a center. Those are running a resource manager. In this case, we're running Slurm. And we use, you're going to need some user authentication in any data center. So we use LDAP for that. So that'll manage all the groups and the user accounts. And then we also have a single sign-on system. So we have an identity provider because typically when you run, all these applications, because they're web applications, you want a single place for a user to sign in. So we're using an identity provider called Dex for that. And then each one of the applications has their own container where the application is installed. And we tried our best to actually have that installed exactly how we run these tools in production. So you can actually see how these are set up and configured. And then you interact with these containers through a web browser. So you can open a web browser and you connect to the applications on different ports that are running on your local machine there. And then here in most HPC centers usually provide a front end or a login node where users can use an SSH client and connect to. So we also have a container for that. And that allows you to kind of SSH into the front end, and then you can kind of jump anywhere inside this little world. So, you can check out how ColdFront was installed, or you can submit some jobs and play around. So that kind of gives you a high level overview.
Andrew, I'm not able to hear you.
Muted. Yeah.
Oops, sorry about that. I hit my mute button. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks. All right, so where did I leave off? Okay, so I'm going to jump into the demo. Before I jump into the demo, just want you to keep some 2 roles in mind as I go through the demo, because I'm going to try to give this demo from 2 perspectives. So the first is the perspective of an HPC administrator. So this is someone who administers the center and wants to provide access to the resources, but also has to actually maybe install these 3 applications. So an administrator is going to want to know, well, how does XDMoD actually work? How do I install it? How do I maybe shred the accounting logs? And in OnDemand, maybe how do I actually install applications and things like that. So the HPC admin is going to want to learn how to do all that kind of stuff, and they can use this tutorial for that purpose. But also, how does a user interact with these tools, and what is their experience like? And one use case for this is, well, if you want to try some new features, and what would that user experience be like? You can actually use this tool set for playing around with that. Okay, so first I'm going to show the this kind of from a command line perspective. So here I've already checked out the tutorial, and I've already actually started all the containers. So when you check this out, there's a helper script in here called HPC TS. And you can run using the start command. If you actually run this command and hit enter, it'll start all the containers for you. So I've already done that, so we can get an idea that I'm just listing my Docker containers here. And you can see they're all named pretty much exactly how you see it in that high level overview slide that I showed previously. And some of these containers will expose a port on your local machine that you can connect to and interact with. So the first example, if we put our kind of HPC administrator hat on, what you might be most interested in is how are these actually installed? How are these configured? Kind of want to get on the command line and dig around. So what we can do is we can fire up an RSSH client to this particular port. And we've created some predefined user accounts that you can connect to. So one of them is HPC admin. So if we type that in and we type in the password, we're actually connected to the front end. So this is the gateway into this little HPC data center that we have running on our local machine here. So we can do things like, for example, what's the status of our cluster, right? So if we type in sinfo, we can see Slurm's running. We have 2 compute nodes. We have 2 different partitions running. We can run a quick job, right? So maybe I'll run a 2-node job. And run the hostname command. So that actually just ran a Slurm job. And I think so the next step for an administrator would be, well, how are these tools installed? So for example, maybe I already run XDMoD and OnDemand, but I want to learn a little bit more about ColdFront. So for example, I can SSH into the ColdFront container, and I can actually start poking around here on the command line. How is this installed? How is it configured? I can check out, for example, ColdFront is configured through a config file here. I can kind of get a sense for, okay, well, these are all the different config parameters. I can maybe change some things around or play around with something. I can run some ColdFront commands. And the tutorial, this full day tutorial kind of walks you through all that. But it allows, an administrator to kind of get their hands dirty here. And likewise, for example, if I'm interested in OnDemand, I can jump over to OnDemand. There's some things for editing different config files. The OnDemand tutorial in particular will walk you through how to create a custom application for OnDemand, and we'll show that in a little bit. But you can kind of get your hands dirty on how all this was installed. And same for XDMoD, right? So one of the things, maybe you're running XDMoD and you're having trouble maybe shredding some of the logs. You can actually use this tutorial for even a development environment where you can actually play around with running some of the various XDMoD setup commands, or actually running some shredding and ingesting of the logs. So that kind of gives you a little bit of an example of what you can do and how you kind of bounce around between these containers. And again, the full day tutorial will kind of walk you through all this. Okay, so that's a little bit about on the admin side. Now, let's put, from the perspective of a user or a researcher, so maybe a PI. So this person is interested in actually using the resources here in this container. So how do they get access to that? So at UB, what we do is we run ColdFront for that. And in this tutorial, we kind of have the idea that ColdFront manages all the access and allocations into this system. So if I'm a researcher and I'm interested in getting access, we can use a tool called ColdFront. So we'll show this off real quick. So as a researcher, I can log into ColdFront because I need to first create a project, and then I need to ask for an allocation into these resources. So here we can log in, and this kind of gives an example of logging in with a single sign-on system. And again, we have some example user accounts that we've set up. So this one is called S. Foster, and they're a researcher. So once we log in, so that gives you an example too of a single sign-on system where you might have 2-factor authentication and all that. But so now once we've logged into ColdFront, we need to create a project. So here the researcher can come in and add a new project, and maybe this is my research. This is my research, right? So then they can put a description here and pick a field of science. And then once they create a project, and a project in ColdFront, you can think of it as kind of a wrapper for capturing various metadata about what the researchers are working on. So for example, there's some field of science, you can add users. So, well, PIs, maybe they have a bunch of grad students working in their lab. They can add some grant information and publications about their research. So, maybe we come in here and we want to add a publication that's pertinent to our research here. We can add a DOI, select this, add it to our project. And this is really good for capturing, the whole return on investment of your resources. And we have a couple of charts in ColdFront where you can say, okay, well, those are many publications and grants and things like that. And then, there's users, right? So we can add a user. So maybe we have, a couple of users working on our project. So maybe this is our grad students. We can add a user to our project. Okay, and users can manage these, and most importantly, they can come in here and also remove users who aren't on their projects anymore, and that helps us keep track of user accounts that aren't needed anymore. And then finally, researchers is going to want to request an allocation to your resources. So here we can request an allocation. And this is going to present the various resources that we have in our center. So, like Dory had in her slide, there's some budget storage, there's project storage. In this case, we actually want to get access to our HPC cluster. And then we can, maybe ask for a justification, and then you can select, if we had a bunch of users on here, you can select maybe only a few users you want access. So you can select all users who want access to this particular allocation. And now what happened here is the user, the PI just submitted an allocation and it's in the new status. So now what needs to be done is the administrator of the center has to come in and then approve this allocation and based on their policies. So I'm going to switch hats real quick. I'm going to log out and I'm going to log in as the admin user, who's the HPC admin user. And as an administrator in ColdFront, you get this new drop down here that shows you all these different things you can do at the administration level. So I can come in here and check out my allocation requests. And we see that we have a new allocation request from the sFoster user. And we can come in here and check out their project. We can make sure that they've given us some information. Maybe we require publications or grants or something. You can come in here and look at the allocation details itself. So here they're requesting allocation to these particular partitions in this cluster. And then on each allocation, we can track various attributes. So for example, we might want to put in, they're getting access to Slurm and maybe their Slurm account name is sFoster. So we want to keep track of that. And you can customize these allocations or these attributes, right? So maybe you have an account number that you want to keep track of every time you give somebody an allocation. These are all customizable, and you can add different attributes to those. You can give it a start date and an end date, right? So maybe we only want this good for a couple weeks. And then once you kind of go through, and every center is different. So once you go through this process, you can then approve the allocation, and then now that allocation is approved. So now if we switch hats again, we log back in as our PI. We can see here we have our allocations. This is kind of a shortcut here, and our allocation is active. When allocations start to expire, they can, they'll see, hey, it's expiring in 30 days. They can renew it. So this kind of gives an overview of ColdFront giving access to the resources. So now Dory mentioned in the beginning, this idea of using ColdFront as the launch place for going to the rest of the center. So one of the things that we've built in is integration with OnDemand. So users can log into ColdFront and on their active allocation that is to a cluster with OnDemand support, they'll get this little button here. And when they click this button, they'll actually be taken directly into OnDemand. So for those of you who aren't familiar with OnDemand is it's kind of an entry point into your cluster where you can run jobs, run interactive GUI applications all through a web browser. You can get it's a really great tool for especially for new users who aren't necessarily familiar with HPC. So just a quick overview again, we can actually get a shell right in the web browser right away. So this was kind of like in the beginning when I showed off actually SSHing into our cluster. This is kind of the same idea, except I'm in a web browser here. So I'm actually connected as the PI user, so we can check out our cluster. Maybe we can even run a job from here, right? OnDemand also gives you a nice file browser, so you can go through here and easily upload and download files all through the web browser. And then probably the coolest part is the interactive OnDemand or the interactive desktops. So here we can launch, for example, an interactive desktop that will actually run a job on our cluster and provide us a graphical desktop in case we want to run a graphical application. So here, I'm in a web browser, and let's see here. And now I can open up, for example, an Xterm window. And I'm in a little GUI here. Okay, and then we can, you can also check out your active jobs, right? So here are the different jobs that I've run on my cluster. This was that hostname job I just ran. This is the actual OnDemand desktop that I'm running. And you can get some more detailed information on the location. So, okay, so that gives you some, just a brief demo of how OnDemand works. And the full day tutorial goes through actually creating custom applications. So here you can actually create custom applications for users when they log in, so that it's easier for them to run various things. And then, so the next thing that a user might be interested in is, okay, I've run my job, but I want to know kind of a little bit more about how my job ran. And that's where XDMoD comes in. So one of the things that we've done here is we've integrated Open OnDemand and Open XDMoD. So when you log into OnDemand here, you'll see this nice little, these charts about some reports about how efficient your jobs were, and then recently completed jobs that you ran. And all these links will take you directly into XDMoD. And this gives you, some very detailed statistics about how your jobs ran, and provide your users a really good tool to further understand their performance of their jobs. This from a user perspective. From an administrative perspective, you also get, kind of the whole entire center overview of how your center is running, how efficient users are, and so this is a big tool. I'm not going to go through all the steps because we just don't have time, but I just want to show you real quick, just to kind of tell the story. So here's a PI user who's just run some jobs, and they're kind of struggling with this one particular job because they're not sure why it's not running the best way it could be. So they can come in here and they can actually click on this particular job, and it takes you into this job viewer in XDMoD, where you can kind of get some really good detailed information about how this job ran, how efficient it was at using the CPU. You can get some information on which nodes it ran on, some summary metrics. You get some more detailed metrics. But this kind of gives you, a very nice tool for figuring out the performance of particular jobs at pretty much, a couple clicks and you're into some deep data here. So that kind of gives a quick example. And in the tutorial, we kind of go through a little bit more on the system administration perspective of actually setting up XDMoD and configuring it. So how do you actually shred the information from your resource manager? How do you set up Supreme? How do you set up some of the more advanced tools that actually do a lot of this data collection here? So I'm going to stop there because I think we just went through all the way through the tools and how they connect. I guess to close the loop, there also is support within XDMoD to integrate back with Open OnDemand to collect some usage data on how OnDemand is being used. And I'm not going to show that off, but that's also, so all the tools are kind of integrated and they work together very well. So definitely check them out and see if they could be useful in your center. So with that, I will hand it back over to Dory to conclude the presentation.
Thanks, Andrew. I am going to post in the chat here the link to our Slack organization that we set up for the tutorial. We have people use this all year round. Even if they haven't gone through the tutorial on their own, they will use these different, we have 3 different channels for the 3 different software products, and then just a general channel if you have questions about the tutorial itself. But feel free to join us over there and hit us up with any questions you have about any of this. All of us have ticketing systems as well. So if you need more in-depth assistance with installing any of this, you could go through our ticketing system, but Slack is a great place to connect with all of us. I did also share the GitHub repo for the tutorial. I wanted to point out a couple of things before we wrap up today. I do want you to know that this isn't really something that I don't want to mince words. This is not something you should use in a production environment. We have very insecure passwords. They're all posted on the internet. So this is really just for testing and messing around with stuff. Like Andrew said, you could go into the containers and change different parameters and see how it works. We will often use these to do an initial upgrade to Slurm and see if it breaks anything before we start, testing that in our dev system. So there's all different ways you can use these containers. The requirements page will detail out what you need. Obviously, you need to install Docker, and there's just a couple other things. The main thing to point out is, as you could probably guess from seeing Andrew's listing of all the containers and the images, it's pretty extensive, and it's a little over 20 gigs right now for those images when you download those. So just be aware you need some decent amount of space. The getting started page is good. If you have any issues with Docker, you will have to make sure those ports that we have open for the front end and the 3 portals are available. If you're running other Docker containers, they might not be, so you might have some issues with that. But the getting started page is pretty good for that, and it's got some good hints and help. And then the applications page just details out all of the URLs for all of the portals, the accounts that we have set up, and the passwords that we have for all of them. And it's just a nice place to go to, and if you need like all of that in one place. After that, then it steps you through. There's a ColdFront page, an XDMoD page, and then an Open OnDemand page. And that will, like Andrew said, step you through everything for the tutorial itself. We do a full day of this tutorial, but it won't take you that long to go through all of this because we're not going to be standing in front of you blabbing. So it should be pretty short, and I think everything is like all up to date. So you should be able to go through that and test it out. And then we also included in our PowerPoint just ways you can connect with us besides Slack and where you can get all of our software. So with that, I think we'll end it and see if anybody has any questions. Feel free to unmute yourself or raise your hand or put it in the chat window, and we're happy to help.
So maybe I'd throw out a question. And I guess, feel free to tell me if this is not quite the right place to throw this question. So we have XDMoD running here. We have OnDemand running here. We don't have ColdFront. But what I really liked kind of in the presentation is the idea that, and from the tools that we've been using, is the idea that we can go in and drill down into jobs, and see the data from that jobs perspective. But once in a while, from the systems, mindset, you're looking at it, you want to look at it from a different perspective. I have a resource, maybe it's the file system, and I would like to kind of then gonna go and look at it from what was going on with that file system at that time, kind of from that job perspective, right? Which jobs were, so it's kind of a curiosity of is this stuff that's being chewed on? Is there something maybe that's already there that I'm just oblivious to? Or is it maybe already on the roadmap or not on the roadmap? From kind of watching these resources that are more global within your, cluster environment, or, that, I don't know if I'm asking my question as well as I'd like to, but maybe you understand what I'm kind of fishing for here.
Neither Andrew or I are XDMoD experts, but we do have a couple other UB people on here who might want to pipe up. But from what I'm understanding you talking about is that you want to be able to say, like, on our storage system during this period of time, what was going on and what jobs were running, or
that's pretty close. Sometimes a user has shown up and they've said, hey, this job was slower this day. And so you go back and you look at the job statistics and you see, and you're trying to find a reason for it. Then you're left kind of going, I wonder what else was going on that file system you were using that day. Could that have been, so then you're looking at what do you have to answer that question. And sometimes you have good data and sometimes you don't. So it was just kind of a curiosity if that was a direction. And as I said, I didn't know if this was the right place, because I know that that's not code that you guys are directly producing. So it's just curiosity. I see that there's other hands being raised. So
yeah, Bob, I see you're unmuted. Do you want to take this? Because I feel like this is something we could do right now in XDMoD.
Well, we can do things that are verging on that. Now, obviously, you can't do anything real time, unfortunately, but you can go back and look at what happened. Now, one of the things you can do is you can look at if you have a job that you're wondering about, you can look at what other jobs were running at the same time. That's available in Job Viewer directly. And you can also, dig in further at trying to learn about what's going on at the same time, but that's a little bit more difficult. But one thing in the Job Viewer, if you have a job you wanted that ran slower, you can look at the other jobs that were running at the exact same time and in that area.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and the only thing I'd add to that, Brian, is that definitely check out Prometheus. So we've actually recently deployed Prometheus here, and it's been great. So we've integrated Prometheus with OnDemand. So a user who's running their job live, they can actually click that button and it'll take them to the Prometheus view of the nodes on their job. So you can get both a real time and a older view of what was going on. And XDMoD now supports Prometheus as well. So we're integrating that in. And that's been a really useful tool for us.
You can do a similar thing with PCP, which a lot of people use also.
Alistair, you have a question?
Yes, we, like the other previous person, we run XDMoD and Open on Demand locally, but not ColdFront. And we have a Slurm cluster. And so what I was wondering is the initial barrier to starting using ColdFront is the setting up of all the front loading of all the accounts. And I just wondered if there was any tool or there that could extract, for example, the Slurm database and import it into ColdFront.
Yeah, that's a great question, and we get that a lot. There is no tool that we provide out of the box yet, although we are working on that. We actually were just talking to a few folks who have done a lot of the work on this, and they were trying to put together something a little bit more general. But we do, so you can do this fairly easily if you know Python. So you can use the ColdFront API to script that. You mentioned, can you import Slurm, and that's definitely something we want to implement because it would be very easy. We can go from ColdFront to Slurm, but it'd be great to go back again.
Right.
But we don't have that currently.
Okay, thanks.
Got a question from the folks at Acre.
Hi, my name is Prasanna. We also have Slurms and other stuff, and I was I'm actually working on something very similar to what ColdFront provides. One thing that really struck me was how actually is ColdFront able to link allocations with actual payments? Is that something that's configurable, but we can do that on our part, or is it something that's like inbuilt? How does that whole payment from the allocations work?
Yeah, so that's a very difficult problem that everybody does a little bit differently. Even within our own university, we have like 10 different ways to accept payment and process payments. So for right now, it's very manual. And what I was saying in the beginning is like sometimes it's just a facade in ColdFront. So you have an allocation and you could put information about an invoice. You could step it through different statuses so you know where it is in the invoice process, but actually a billing system, it is not, at least not yet. We know there are several different groups who have done a few different things with that, but they haven't really been general enough to contribute the code back to ColdFront. So, you know, we're happy to sit down with you and go through what you want to do, and we could tell you if it's possible to do it right out of box or what you might have to do to modify it to make that work for you.
Sounds good. Yeah, thanks.
Graham?
Yeah. Well, we're already like somewhat familiar with Open On Demand and getting up to speed on OpenXDMoD, but like so many places, we have a ton of custom code to handle allocations and web front ends and so on. And we've been kind of curious to try and figure out if ColdFront could handle that for us. And so one question among many probably is ColdFront can clearly populate your Slurm accounts, but it seems like we'd also need to synchronize somehow to like Unix groups with an LDAP or whatever, for example, handle permissions on project storage, for example. So I was wondering if ColdFront supported that either directly or via plugin, or if maybe people just run their own out-of-band synchronization scripts, or if that's something people are doing and have a solution for.
Yeah, so we actually run FreeIPA here at UB, and we've implemented a FreeIPA plugin that does the syncing of the Unix groups from ColdFront to FreeIPA and FreeIPA to ColdFront. So that's available out of the box. If you don't run FreeIPA, there are some examples on how to use ColdFront for things like user lookups and things like that. So it wouldn't be too hard to, to kind of implement what you're talking about, I think, in a stock LDAP or even if you were doing something else. So I think the examples are there. If you use FreeIPA, then you're in luck, it's already done.
Thanks. Yeah.
There are quite a few groups that are using some sort of LDAP with ColdFront. We're not really sure at what points, like about maybe syncing Unix groups or if it's just LDAP lookups. So if you wanted to join us on Slack, that's something you could ask, and we often have the community popping up and answering questions before we can even get over there and respond. So it's a good group of people.
Yeah, that sounds good. I mean, yeah, we pretty much run vanilla Open LDAP, but it's probably also more complex than that. No, we look up things at the general purpose university identity management, as well as having our own internal stuff. So yeah, there's a lot going on to figure out.
That would probably be easier to manage than Active Directory. So I bet you would be able to just to use it pretty easily.
All right, are there any more questions for Dory or Andrew? Please feel free to unmute. Well, I guess there's no more questions. So Dory and Andrew, thank you so much for presenting on the HPC toolset. It was great hearing about all these great tools.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us. Really appreciate it.
All right, so to close this out, please join us again next month for the second portion of our early career assessment discussion. And as I mentioned before, if you are attending SC this year, please join us Sunday evening for the joint social gathering with HPC CISPros at Pegasus City Brewery. And with that, hope to see you all next month, and hope you all have a great day.
Thanks for having us.